Welcome back to Career Tea, where we spill the tea about career journeys, lessons learned, and the honest truth behind job titles. Today, I'm honored to be joined by a creative strategist who spent 25 years in the advertising and marketing industry, even working on the iconic What Happens in Vegas Stays in Vegas campaign. After navigating the emotional and practical challenges of 4 corporate layoffs himself, he has written a book to help others through that journey. He is the author of the new book, The Layoff Journey, From Dismissal to Discovery. Steve Jaffe, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Of course, it's my pleasure. And Steve, again, I want to thank you for being here, but also really thank you for writing this book at such a practical time and a crucial time in our life where so many people, including myself, have experienced layoffs. So I want to start here. You mentioned that you were laid off 4 times over 22 years, with your most recent layoff in 2023. That's an incredible amount of personal experience that you've probably drawn from. And you've described the emotional toll that you've experienced through these transitions. So can you elaborate a little on the emotional responses that you've encountered during your layoff journey and how you learned the process of those feelings effectively?
Yeah. Well, I'll set the stage for where this journey began for me and where it landed and how I evolved into writing this book. So it was the spring of 2001, and I was living in San Francisco working at an ad agency. I was doing quite well, and I had just gotten married. Things were going great. The first dot-com bubble burst and imploded the San Francisco ad industry. Technology, finance, everything just kind of was decimated. So I found myself out of a job, and that hit me really, really hard. I was accustomed to the belief of meritocracy. I was really bought into, if you work hard and you're smart enough, you'll be met with success. And I fully expected to achieve great success. Instead, I was met with a layoff. And it took me about a year and a half to fully process that. All of what I didn't know at the time were really the stages of grief. Fast forward now is the summer of 2023, and I'm undergoing my 4th layoff in my career, and I sail right through it. It's like water off a duck's back. And what I realized in that experience is over the course of these years and these subsequent layoffs, I've learned a set of skills, and I've learned the skills of how to manage the stages of grief associated with layoff in a way that doesn't have the same effect, certainly doesn't take anywhere near as long. And I realized that in that layoff, there was about 20% of the company that was laid off with me. And I wanted to find a way to communicate to those people I was laid off with, listen, it's going to be okay. You're going to come out the other side of this. Let me give you some words of advice and some tips and tricks to help get you through this period. And it was then that I realized this would be the great topic of a book, because not only could I help the 20% of the people I was laid off with, but I could help all of the other thousands and probably millions of people that have been laid off. So I set out to write this book, and it's been very well received. I had no idea that 2025 would be a landmark year in terms of layoffs. So it is very much a topic that is top of mind and affecting a lot of people. And I hope that the book offers a roadmap to navigating what can be a really, really difficult period in somebody's life.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a time in 2001 you said where you experienced your first layoff in San Francisco. What a time to be in San Francisco during the dot-com bubble. I guess that was a place to be for that to be happening. But you mentioned your last layoff in 2023 where you experienced a layoff amongst a few thousand other people. At that point, you've already experienced it a few times. So you're kind of how the, journey goes versus a lot of those people. I'm sure there were probably a lot younger people maybe that got laid off first times, right? So for them, it's fresh versus like you've kind of gone through it. So, and then we'll get back to, the idea of meritocracy as well. I'll get some questions down the line on that because that's a common thought even to this day right now. And it's interesting to hear that you experienced layoffs so long ago, and a lot of people going through layoffs right now, they think that it's just happening now, but it's been happening for so long. But I guess maybe it is picking up, or maybe this generation is really seeing the heavy load of layoffs happening maybe from a couple years ago, and especially with like the growth of AI and how much layoffs are happening now.
Yeah.
But so back to your book, you share a very vivid and powerful personal story in your book about your first layoff, as mentioned in 2001, which was right after your wedding. You describe it sitting in a meeting and only to realize that people were being laid off. They were being escorted into a conference room with HR, and you're sitting there thinking that you could probably be next. And at that moment, as you say in your book, you felt like your world was being turned on its axis, right? In just a few seconds or a few minutes.
Yeah.
What was it like to try and process that moment of seeing that happening, that deep shock feeling, that
Yeah.
disbelief that, wow, this could actually be happening to me, especially during a time that should have been one of the happiest times of your life, should have been one of the highest points of your life. And now, boom, you're hit with this deep shock that you're experiencing for the first time in your life.
Yeah, yeah. I think part of the reason why it took me so long to process that layoff was because of the way it happened. Agencies have rooms that they use for focus groups that have like a two-way mirror. So you can look into a conference room and observe the focus group. So I was in the room with the two-way mirror meeting with a vendor talking about a future ad campaign, very much planning the future, literally. And through the two-way mirror, I could see what was happening in the conference room. I couldn't hear it, but I could see like leadership, HR. I could see papers on the conference room table. I could see people walk in. The room was very solemn and the meetings were not very long. And I could read people's facial expressions and body language and know these were not good meetings. Something was happening, right? And in the middle of that meeting with the vendor, someone called me into the conference room. And I said, I'm in the middle of a meeting. Can this wait? And they said, no. I walked in the conference room and it was like a funeral. It was so solemn. And I sat down, HR starts talking, and literally in minutes, I go from planning the future of this campaign. Like I said, like you said, I was just married. The future was like wide open. And you get told, thank you, we're doing a reduction in force, you're being let go, and you have like 5 minutes to pack your desk, and, they give you information about severance and COBRA. But the stages of grief, the very first one is denial. And with denial comes a total shock. My body shuts down, my brain shuts down, I go into a sweat, my mouth gets dry, my heart starts beating, everything becomes a fog. I don't really remember what they're saying, and it's your body's way of processing this enormous amount of information that you just can't handle. So your body kind of starts to shut down. And then over the course of a couple of days, you work through it and you start to think about what it means, maybe what was said, but it was overwhelming. Yeah,
Yeah, I hear
that was
you.
a tough one.
Yeah, and when you talked about the one-way mirror, when I
Mhm.
first read that, I must have missed it because I thought that was a metaphor. I didn't realize that it was an actual you're in a room and you're
Yeah,
seeing it happen. I mean,
yeah,
it seems like a movie. It seems like a movie of a scene in a movie. You're just sitting there, you're seeing it happen, and you're like, wow, you're going in next. Now, you talk about denial, so let's touch on that chapter a little bit. Your book isn't just necessarily about theory, it's a practical guide, as you mentioned, right? So in the denial chapter, you provide a roadmap exercise, as you mentioned earlier as well, where it's focused on finances. Now, why is confronting the reality of your financial situation so crucial in the early stages after a layoff? And what's your advice for making that difficult process less overwhelming for someone, especially going through it the first time and they don't really know what to do about finances and their financial situation?
yeah, yeah. I think usually the first place your mind will go to is my source of income has now been removed. How am I going to survive? How am I going to live? How am I going to pay the bills? If I'm responsible for a family, how am I going to provide? Right? By doing that financial exercise first, you're able to then give yourself the time, the space, the peace of mind to process all of the emotional things. And you're going to be faced with that severance agreement. Don't ever sign the severance agreement right when they hand it to you. Take the time to review it carefully and maybe have somebody with some legal expertise review it. Because when you review your financial situation, you will then understand where you can cut expenses, where you can bridge some gaps, and where you may need assistance in a different type of a severance package. If when they put, let's say, 2 weeks on the table and you do the math and you understand what your reality is, it then gives you maybe some ammo to go back to them and renegotiate something that may help you bridge a little bit better. But that practical exercise will give you the peace of mind to then process all the important emotional things that you need to go through.
Absolutely. Now, you use a lot of metaphors in your book, and that was one of my favorite things in there. I love quotes, I love metaphors. And one of the powerful metaphors that you used was from Buddhism. You compared a rock and a stream to illustrate resilience. You say that during your first layoff, you were the rock, but by your last layoff, you had become the stream. So, can you explain that mindset shift, right? How did you learn to stop resisting and start adapting to the change? What does it mean that you were the rock first and then you became the stream after 4 layoffs?
Yeah, I think it's rooted in the idea of acceptance. Acceptance is one of the stages of grief, and it's what helps you get on the other side of this experience. It requires flexibility and it requires a willingness to keep moving forward, even when the path isn't clear. I was stuck in the first layoff, I was stuck in a very fixed mindset for those 18 months. I resisted the circumstance. I was very much in denial. I was really rooted in trying to bargain my way back into the job or bargaining my way in terms of within my own head. What could I have done differently? Why me? You replay conversations. That I was kind of stuck in that mode. It was very rigid and kind of unmoving in my mindset. So that rock that sits really firmly in the middle of the stream, ultimately, as time goes on, the stream wears the rock down, and you won't win that battle. So you can acquiesce to the circumstances, accept them on their own terms, and begin and not get stuck in the why me. In the acceptance, it gives you the freedom to put what's happened behind you and then move forward. And I really like that metaphor of the stream and the rock. I like in Buddhism and a lot of wisdom traditions, they use streams and rivers as metaphors for life circumstances. And I think it works well as an analogy.
Yeah, I love it. And there's a deep meaning to it. And I really enjoyed when I read it. Now, kind of going off of that, your book also offers a lot of actionable strategies for overcoming, that job loss anxiety and being able to kind of get back to rebuilding your career. Like you mentioned, kind of getting back to the same type of job or same career field, right? And every day feeling anxious that maybe you're battling your finances or what career is next for you. What would you say are some of the most effective coping mechanisms that you discovered or you suggest that helped you gain clarity and resilience after a layoff? What are some practical, actionable strategies that people can implement?
Yeah, yeah. The first thing I recommend people to do when they've been faced with a layoff is to take a minute to pause. And it's important to do that financial exercise. And once you then understand where you stand, take a breath, sit with the experience, and give yourself the freedom to feel what that feels like. It's a deep loss. Something has been taken from you. It's important to process that and not deny that experience. It's important to give yourself the space and the grace to recognize that you're going through a difficult period. I recommend a couple of different things. I recommend people talk about the experience. You're going to replace your former network and colleagues that you worked with a new set of community. So those are people are going to be who you're going to lean on when the times are difficult, right? 40% of all Americans have been laid off at least once. A lot more people have been laid off than people realize. When you open up and you start talking about it and you give it a voice and you give it a name, you diminish some of that shame and embarrassment that comes from a layoff. So reach out to your community, whoever that may be, friends, family, colleagues, mentors, and let them know what's happening. You don't want to go through it alone. Having that support is really important. Knowing that this is a temporary setback, that you will come out the other side is really important. Not feeling like this is a declaration on who you are as a person, rather than a set of circumstances that are not that uncommon, that you are a victim of for no fault of your own. Most layoffs aren't performance related.
Yeah.
Kind of assessing the situation in a way that gives yourself compassion and the ability to start to rebuild. It's likely that you will go through the stages of grief, maybe not all of them. They don't happen linearly, and some stick around longer than others. It just depends on each individual person and their own life experience. But know that the layoff was something that happened to you, but what happens next is entirely up to you.
Yeah, I love that, and it's incredible to hear when you mentioned what percentage of people have been laid off at least once in their life. And my first time when I was laid off, and I hear you where, like you say, people will feel that a little bit of feel of shame or embarrassment. It's hard for them to kind of reach out to their network, right? I can tell from personal experience, like it was hard for me to be able to like reach out and be like, hey, this has happened. I almost didn't want to, because like you don't realize how many people have experienced it, and if you put it out there, people that have experienced the same thing or people that feel what you felt, they'll be willing to kind of help you and be your support system. So, but it's so hard in that moment to really understand that, to hear it. So it's great that to hear that from you and kind of putting into numbers of wow, it's a big population of people that have gone through it at least once. So there's a
Yeah,
good chance in everybody's network
right.
there's a good amount of people that have experienced layoffs. Now, earlier in our interview, you talked about the idea of meritocracy. That you mentioned that is one of the biggest myths in the modern workplace and describing it as an antiquated equation. You
Uh,
even share a story about a hardworking coworker that you had that no matter how hard he worked, he was still laid off. And, he
mhm,
worked on weekends, he worked
mhm,
hard, but he was still faced with a layoff.
mhm.
So, what would you say is the new formula for job security in today's corporate world? And what do you hope that readers take away from really the truth that hard work isn't always going to be enough to keep your job, especially in today's day and age? And a lot of with all these layoffs going off, it's a lot of young people also being hit with layoffs. And young people, a lot of them do work hard, work long hours. So
Yeah.
what's the message here for them?
I think that for many industries, layoffs are inevitable. I don't believe that there is anything that is layoff proof. And I don't think there's anything you can really do to like insulate yourself from having been the victim of a layoff. I think that, and I see this happening more often now where people, like you said, young people in early in their career are taking a much more kind of hands-on direct approach to their careers. So they may not be at any one place that long because if they're unhappy, they're going to leave, right? If they don't feel fulfilled, they're going to leave. They don't feel the same loyalty to a particular employer that maybe other generations have because they've seen those other generations be treated in a really dispensable way. So, I think that's a great way to manage your career in a way that fits your needs. Any false loyalty or sense of duty to an employer, I think is misplaced because employers don't have any loyalty or duty to you. If circumstances arrive, your name could very easily be on a list because cutting your salary is an easier way to drive revenue to the bottom line than increasing sales. And they may not think twice about freeing up your salary and letting you go. So, um, I think in a way, it's kind of every man for himself. Everybody is kind of a free agent and doing what they feel is best for themselves.
Yeah, do you think that do you think it's quite unfair or manipulative of companies to try to continuously portray this we're a family where really behind the scenes, as you say, they don't owe you any loyalty, they have no loyalty, and as soon as they want to cut costs, like
Mhm.
you could be out the door. Do you
Yeah.
think it's unfair or manipulative, or do you think it's fair game and at the same time employees should also play that manipulative game of
Yeah.
being like, yeah, sure, we're
Right.
loyal, but really
Right.
not.
Yeah, I think in business, there's a certain give and take of everybody's kind of conning each other. Now, I do believe it's important to work hard. I do believe showing up every day, giving 100% is like ethically um, important, for your own personal values. Showing up and working hard, I believe, is important as a representation of who you are. But knowing that that won't always be met with success or longevity. But yeah, I think the companies giving that kind of family eroded a bit. I think that's been, and understandably and rightfully so, been somewhat diminished over time because it's like total BS and everybody kind of ends up seeing right through it. But one thing that I will say is, and it gets to kind of culture, corporate culture, they're trying to create a sentiment around like the family concept. And around that, ultimately, it comes to the corporate culture, and they will define culture and model culture in different ways, some healthy and some not so healthy. And I think the best indicator of a company's culture is how they conduct layoffs. Are they transparent? Do they communicate? Are they fair? Are they balanced? There are times, let's say during COVID, companies had to lay people off during COVID. Is that any fault of their own? Not really. Now, how they handle it is definitely an expression of if they're a good company or not. Um, companies can and often are full of BS.
Yeah, yeah. No, I hear you. And especially in this day and age with all the layoffs that going on, the more I hear that message from companies, it kind of makes me chuckle a little bit because I'm like, yeah, okay, I hear you guys, but I don't think anybody
Yeah.
really believes it.
No.
Now, in your book, you connect the experiences of a job loss, as we've been talking about it, to the 7 stages of grief. Could you briefly kind of go over those 7 stages for people that may not be familiar with all 7 stages of grief? You always hear the term 7 stages of grief,
Mhm.
but people might not really know what all those 7 stages are. And you mentioned that, sometimes a lot of people might not go through all 7 stages, or they might not necessarily happen in order for
Mhm.
people.
Mhm.
Can you explain how that could be? How can you experience different stages? And also in your cases of, going through 4 layoffs, have you experienced all those 7 stages of grief?
Yeah, yeah. So the stages of grief were created by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was a researcher observing terminally ill patients, and she observed these were stages that they all tended to go through. And as the research went on, it was observed that family members of those terminally ill people also went through these stages. It's also commonly believed that people going through a divorce, let's say, or other kind of traumatic life events, this tends to be the roadmap people experience in terms of emotions. So it's a somewhat universal way, like humans and our biology accept and process really, really traumatic things. So the 7 stages, and sometimes these get defined a little bit differently, but generally speaking, they are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, reconstruction, and renewal. And you can kind of break them out in terms of the first 4: denial, anger, bargaining, and depression. Those are the really hard ones. Those will test your fortitude and your resilience. And like I've said, some can last longer than others. For me, depression was one that I probably experienced most profoundly. I didn't know I had propensity for depression, and the first layoff was kind of a trigger for that. And I learned a lot of skills then to counterbalance and counteract depression over the years. And it was from that experience being laid off. The last 3 stages are kind of where you start to turn the corner and you kind of start to see the light of day, the light at the end of the tunnel, beginning with acceptance. Acceptance is when you accept what's happened to you on its own term. And instead of looking backward, you look forward. And that's where the discovery process can really begin. You can find purpose and meaning and some transformation. I'm never one to say that layoffs are a blessing in disguise, because they're not. They completely, totally suck. But they do allow you to take a pause and assess your career path, your career trajectory, economic conditions, your own personal values, and align that with what you're doing professionally. And maybe you find alignment and you continue on the path that you're on, or you find an opportunity to pivot. And that's where that tends to take place.
Yeah, absolutely. And, kind of going off of those first four stages where I feel that the strongest emotions are in play, going through those first four stages of grief, you write that layoffs can be a Mount Rushmore level grief, on par with, as you mentioned, divorce or death of a loved one. Now, do you think it's necessary, and why do you feel that it's so important to recognize job loss and being laid off with this level of emotional weight compared to those examples?
Yeah, I think people may kind of tend to minimize their own emotions. So if you're feeling really, really emotional about something, you may not be giving yourself the grace to experience and feel that full range of emotions. You may say, this shouldn't bother me as much. I shouldn't let this have such an effect on me. And I think understanding that this is a really significant life transition, a life stage equal to those other things may give people the freedom and the grace to recognize the pain that they're feeling and say, gosh, you know what? I really shouldn't minimize this. This is a big deal. And this is a difficult thing that I need to take a minute and kind of figure out. I think it's the key that unlocks the opportunity of processing these emotions in a healthy way and in a way that doesn't last 18 months. So my goal for the book is that I take these lessons that I learned and I present them in a way that if somebody's laid off, they can read the book and process this in a much shorter period of time that allows them then to move on and move forward and come out the other side quicker.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. And so next, I want to touch on another chapter. In the chapter on pain, you describe a moment where you were overhearing your boss discussing your impending layoff,
Mm.
right? And you talk about how you had to try to remain calm. You had to try to bite your tongue, not to say anything, as a lot of people can be filled with anger or frustration, right? And you talk about negotiating separation agreement and the importance of exiting with goodwill and not burning bridges. Now, this seems to be a key element, and it's a key thing because I feel like a lot of people going through that first layoff, they are filled with that anger, right? They might feel like they want to say something or get something off their chest, which could potentially burn bridges. But you talk about the importance of not burning bridges, right? So, what is your best practical advice for someone who's filled with anger,
Mhm.
filled with frustration, but they essentially need to leave their role with the reputation intact, keeping everything calm in case they need references or, kind of not burning bridges, as you say?
Yeah. Yeah. Find a healthy outlet. Find some place where you can let that anger out in a way separate from those people that laid you off. So go to the gym, take up kickboxing, find something that you enjoy, use that as the outlet. I tell people, um, you know, give yourself 90 days before you leave any Glassdoor reviews. Give yourself some space and some time. Careful who you talk to, careful who you confide in. What's known as kind of like the hidden job market. And some people estimate it's as high as 70% of jobs aren't posted. They're not on LinkedIn. You get those through networking. 25% of my jobs I got through my network that were never posted. In fact, they never even had job descriptions written. I only got that because of goodwill. Sometimes when you're laid off, somebody might say to you, hey, I'm really sorry this didn't work out, but I know somebody, they're hiring. Let me talk to them and help you out. That goodwill is something that you want to foster. Not to mention, when you are interviewing, maybe people do some back channels. They ask people about you, who you worked with, or even references and reviews. You need all of that on your side when you're going to go get your next job. So it's important to maintain goodwill. And like we were talking about earlier, a lot about corporate America is a bunch of BS, right? This is one of those. You have to bite your tongue and, not tell them what you really think about the circumstances of the situation, because ultimately, you're going to need those people when you get another job. One of the things that's most important in looking for another job, legally, people can't really call your former employer and ask too much. One of the things that they can ask is, are they eligible for rehire? If that former employer says no, that's a big giant red flag and it's going to bite you in the butt. But if they say, yeah, they're eligible for rehire, that means you left on good terms, right? If nothing else in your severance agreement, you want to negotiate for eligible for rehire.
Mm.
Now, if you leave under, angry circumstances, you decide you're going to use this opportunity to let them have it. Well, there goes your opportunity for rehire,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's a small world, so you never know who's gonna know
Yeah.
who. Anybody from your last company could know somebody else that you're interviewing for, and then boom, an opportunity that could have been a job, now it's gone. And yeah, speaking of having outlets, yeah, making sure that you have a safe outlet, like you
Hmm.
said, going to a gym, letting it
Yeah.
out there, not
Right.
not letting it out on just anybody, still controlling those emotions. Now, you mentioned that a layoff can also magnify other problems that you might already have in your life. It could be a problem that it's small, but now the layoff happens and you may that might become your outlet, that other problem. You might see
Yeah.
that, magnifies it. And you much like Las Vegas, right? It magnifies your personal vices. How would you say this magnification affects individuals' health? And what strategies do you think they can use to understand that other problems are not related to their layoff and being able to separate those from each other?
Yeah. That's, I think, one of the unseen, unheard, untalked about effects of a layoff that I wish employers would understand better because they may not be as cavalier with layoffs. And that's, after somebody's laid off, you see an increase in divorce, separation, breakups. You see an increase in health issues. Maybe it's an increase in heart attacks. Maybe it's an increase in weight or obesity or drinking or suicide, right? There's a lot of things that manifest. You take away somebody's job, which is often their sense of purpose and their meaning and how they define themselves, and you take away their means of income, there can be a lot of really dramatic side effects. That's why in the book, I talk a lot about a holistic mind, body, spirit approach that will give you the baseline of what you need to manage this. So get plenty of sleep, eat well, eat a really healthy, nutritious diet, limit your drinking and alcohol intake. Alcohol is a depressant, and if you're in the depression stage, it's only going to exacerbate that. I talk a lot about exercise. Exercise is great in managing that anger stage, but it's also great in giving you a chemical release to balance these potentially negative emotions. When you exercise, your brain and body release dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin. Those are all really good chemicals that will counterbalance some of the other things that you're going through. Practice a breathing practice, maybe some meditation, some prayer, whatever it is that you call it. Spend some time alone with yourself and alone with your thoughts. These are, for me, non-negotiables that I try
Yeah.
and do every day. And I feel like they set me up for success so that whatever challenge life throws at me, I know I've got a baseline to begin from that is a strong foundation.
Right. Yeah. So important. Some of these things you mentioned can be a big slippery slope, especially when you have so much time on your hand, which kind of leads me to my next question, which is, the topic that you talk about, the term messy metal, right?
Mm,
At following a layoff, where, an uncertain and challenging space between, something that you knew well, something that was known, and now the unknown. You don't know what's yet to come, that messy metal. How can individuals embrace this transitional phase and make it an intentional period or have intentional actions rather than just waiting? Because a lot of people, as the definition is, the messy middle, they might not really know what to do. And I feel like they could blink and time just goes by and they're just been sitting there doing nothing, right? And
yeah,
as you mentioned, like one of the points is drinking, not slipping into those things because, like I said, before you know it, time could go by. So, what advice do you have
yeah.
going through that messy middle period where you're just lost?
Yeah, yeah. It's easy to feel like taking action, some type of action is progress. So it's easy to, as soon as you're laid off, want to update your resume, want to start going on job interviews and start going to replace the job that you just lost. I feel like that's maybe the worst thing that you can do. I think taking that pause that we talked about earlier, working through this grief and through these emotions is really important before you start interviewing, because this kind of emotional baggage that you're carrying will show up and will manifest in your job interviews, and you may not realize it. It may manifest in your resume and how you talk about and frame your last employer. And being able to explain the situation to future employers is really important. So it's important to pause and give yourself the time to think about, like you said, intentionality is really important. To think about, is this career path the career path that I want to be on? Is my industry experiencing contraction? Should I pivot now because my current field is being replaced by AI maybe? And I
Yeah.
need to get ahead of that now, because if I continue in this same field, I'm only going to set myself up for another layoff coming soon, because AI is going to only become more prevalent. So taking a minute to understand, what is my value system, and does my career and job align with my values and my priorities?
Mhm.
So that's how you move through it with intentionality, and how you come out the other side with a greater purpose because you've done that work. Right. So, but also I think getting through that messy middle is allowing yourself the recognition that this is messy. This is difficult. This is challenging. And I'm in the middle of this kind of no man's land between not having a job and having a job, and all that baggage that comes with that around, well, what does this say about me? What does this mean? What are the implications? What's my identity and purpose? It may allow you the freedom to not put as much weight in those emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of, being able to know that you have to kind of plan ahead of time is so important. I like the quote where it says, failing to plan is planning to fail. So
Right.
if you don't move with a plan, you don't have intention, you're kind of just shooting in the dark
Hmm.
and you might miss. Now, earlier in the interview, you talked a little bit about how after your first layoff, you didn't really know whether you could experience depression. You didn't really know that you could be depressed, right? And when you first experienced that, it was something new for you.
Hmm.
In the chapter on depression, you discussed the concept of analytical rumination, suggesting that dwelling on a problem can serve a positive purpose.
Hmm.
Now, that could be surprising to some people because I've heard a lot of people say, don't dwell on a problem,
Hmm.
right? Don't
Hmm.
dwell on
Hmm.
something that
Hmm.
happened. But now this is the opposite. You say it could serve a positive purpose. Can you explain this hypothesis and kind of how it helped you reframe, your thinking during these difficult layoffs?
Yeah, I think in the right context, it's valuable. So in the context of assessing the career path and like your field and where the areas of opportunity are, and kind of, as Wayne Gretzky says, skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it is. Those sorts of things is a healthy self-examination, right? And in that rumination, you can maybe find some solutions and opportunities. So in that situation that I was in, I talk about in the book that not long after I was laid off in San Francisco in the spring of 2001, my wife was also laid off. So we both found ourselves out of work in a city that was just getting decimated. So that contraction was happening citywide across all fields. It didn't make sense for us to stay there. So with that deliberate deliberation, we chose to move to Los Angeles because we thought the economy was better and there were more openings and opportunities. That came from that like examination and rumination. That's where like finding the solutions and finding the areas of opportunity in a difficult situation, I think can help you find that light at the end of the tunnel. And that's
Yeah.
just one example.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I loved about your book was the metaphors, the quote you use, and kind of explaining them, why they matter, right? And what they truly mean. And so another quote was from Sarah Blakely's father, where it said, what did you fail at this week, right? And
Hmm.
kind of going off of my last question, where you kind of focus on a problem. Here, it seems like, you're focusing on, what did you fail at this week, right?
Hmm.
So you use this in your book to kind of talk about the value of resilience and grit. Can
Hmm.
you talk a little bit about that quote? How do these relate to each other? What does that really mean of what did you fail at this week? Why
Mm.
should we really think about that? And how can that mindset really help us when people are going through endless job rejections day after day, week after week?
Yeah, the Sarah Blakely story is a great, great story. And I love, she's somebody who had a lot of setbacks. She started businesses, they didn't quite work out. She kept at it because she didn't see the failure as um, like the setback, the end all be all. She found it as an opportunity to just find another way of doing something. It's like, I think Thomas Edison said he didn't fail 1,000 times at inventing the light bulb. He just didn't find the right one yet. Like it was coming. It just hadn't happened yet. And she was instilled with this early on by her father, like you said, saying, tell me what you failed at today as a celebration. And he would celebrate that because it meant she was trying new things. She wasn't afraid of failure. I think, gosh, if we all grew up with that type of environment that
Yeah.
celebrated failure as not a negative, but as a positive, imagine what we could do.
Yeah.
So the idea of resilience and grit is you get knocked down 8 times, you stand up 9. You don't let life, you don't become a victim of life. You don't let the circumstances dictate who you are. You dictate who you are. So, a layoff is a temporary setback, but it can be much more if you let it, right? And I find that grit and tenacity and resilience is a really important skill when you've been laid off in not only managing these emotions and these stages of grief, but when you go to start applying for another job and you're sending out your 100th resume and you're getting ghosted and you're going on interviews and you think they went well, and you never hear back from them. You're hearing no all the time. You need a lot of grit to stand up each day and keep doing it in the face of those circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And there's the message there in positive thinking. And
Mhm.
that like, even in negative experiences, there is something positive that you can take away from it. And as you mentioned, Sarah Blakely obviously taking her failures as kind of something positive. That's a new experience. You learn something away from it. And that's a strong message because a lot of people will, experience failures and they'll only kind of think about the negative parts of it, the negative emotions. But if you think about what you learn from it, those failures can become a not necessarily that you aim to fail, but it becomes a fun thing where you fail at it. You're like, well, what did I learn from it? And
Right,
then next time you kind of improve on it.
right.
Now, kind of moving on to another stage of grief, another chapter on reconstruction. Use the metaphor and the thought of ship of Theseus, right? And you talk about reconstructing your identity after you've been laid off. A lot of people, they might feel that maybe going into a new job or between those stages of an old job to a new job, they might feel that imposter syndrome, right?
Mhm.
And and you can kind of explain the ship of Theseus theory a little bit more, but essentially they might feel that, kind of think lower of themselves, or think that they're not as skillful as they thought they were at a job, right? So how
Mhm.
does this metaphor help people understand that what they've learned, their core values, what they've gained at their jobs and careers, they're not just going to disappear just because they were laid off, right? How can they use this to understand that?
Yeah, that's really important. I think what you just said is a key takeaway of, we were talking about you lose your identity maybe because of this association of who you are associated with your job. When you're laid off, you lose the job title, but you don't lose all of that experience. You don't lose those skills. You take those with you no matter what happens. You take those into the next job. And that's a great way to frame this layoff in terms of how you're talking about it with future employers. And I think that's where they can take your job title, but they're not taking all of that. Right. So the story with the ship of Theseus, which I really like, is there was a ship in Greece that they had put into a museum and the wooden planks of the ship had started to rot because it was so old. So they ended up replacing all of the wood of the ship. And the question became philosophically, was it still the same ship? This ship had succeeded through a lot of ancient Greek battles, and it was very highly regarded as like a great kind of ship of war because of all of its victories. And if you replace all of the wooden planks with new wooden planks, is it still the same ship or is it a different ship? And does that ship still hold the essence of those victories and that same kind of notoriety and whatnot? And the takeaway is this same idea of we are who we are. Nobody can take from you what is yours, your experience, your knowledge, your skills. The slippery slope of a layoff can be a personal judgment that you're not good enough and that you can't cut it. And that while a layoff isn't a reflection of your performance, there's that lingering doubt of, gosh, maybe I wasn't good enough, right?
Mhm.
Holding on to what you bring and what you offer and your positives is what's really important. And that's a really important thing to get you through this and to get you to the other side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, a lot of times these layoffs are not necessarily a person's fault. It could be something happening with the economy or the business is changing. And I think having that strong support system, as we talked about, having that strong network is important too, because they can kind of reinforce your beliefs, your skills, kind of letting you know that, you are skilled, you can do what you did before, and, you kind of haven't deteriorated from those skills.
Mhm.
You also talk about reframing layoffs as opportunities for personal growth.
Mhm.
Now, a lot of people, as we mentioned, they might kind of let time go by, but they can really be using that time to kind of grow personally, right? Add skills to themselves. Do you have and can you share specific examples from your, 4 layoff experiences where you kind of had to learn new skills or discover a new path or opportunity that you might have not considered before, and it only came available because you were going through this layoff experience?
Yeah, yeah. So after my third layoff, I had found that the area of marketing that I was in was experiencing contraction. The marketing world was changing. It was becoming less generalist and more specialist. And I had a very generalist set of skills. So I had seen almost like every job I had seen that was available seemed like it was in product marketing. They were abundant. And I thought to myself, well, gosh, when I look at what they're looking for from a product marketer, I possess all of those skills. I've done all of that stuff. It's almost like they were just kind of repackaging a certain set of skills that have already existed, but just kind of calling it something different. So I set out to then repackage my background and skills and experience in a way that reflected what a product marketer would be doing. Fortunately, I was successful then in landing a job in product marketing, and it turned out that I really enjoyed it. And it was a great career pivot for me. And it is an area now where there are a lot of jobs. So I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to make that observation. And I think that gets back at that deliberate deliberation that we were talking about, being able to give yourself some space to assess not only your own personal circumstances, but what is the market doing? What are the conditions? Skating to where the puck is going to be, not where it is, may help insulate you from maybe future layoffs or because of avoiding some industry contraction.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also mentioned that, writing this book for you was a transformative experience. Can you share some insight on how the act of writing, right, going through the thoughts, coming up with the plan, writing the book, helped you process your own layoff experiences and kind of facilitated your own personal growth? As I'm sure, a lot of memories come back, a lot of feelings and experiences come back as you're writing this book.
Yeah. I had always wanted to write a book. I just didn't have the subject matter. And when I realized that this was something that I thought I could use to help people, it became incredibly meaningful. Early in my career, I found success in job titles and raises and bonuses and um, kind of those material things, right? Later in my career, what I really value now is helping people. And I found that this was a great vehicle to do that. So if it's a way to help people manage a difficult period, I find that really rewarding. And it was a realization that I've been through difficult things and I can get through difficult things. I believe I'm someone who has learned quite a bit of resilience and grit, and I'm proud of that. And it's come from some of these really difficult experiences. But on the other side now, I'm much more prepared for kind of the challenges of life where they don't hold me back in the way that they used to. So it was at the end of that journey, that realization that gosh, I'm a bit of a survivor here, and hold that achievement like with some pride.
Yeah. And my next question is, regarding after, I believe it was after your first layoff, where you talk about it was about 18 months or so where you are laid off, and 18 months is a long time. And you talk about this important concept of negative capability and the ability to kind of being able to remain in a state of uncertainty, right? Without kind of needing clear answers, right? Can you touch on that a little bit? Because I feel like a lot of people, including myself, when you go through a layoff, you're constantly you feel like you need to find the answer. You need to find the answer the next day, the next hour. But you talk about kind of being able to just be relaxed, kind of being contained with being uncertain about what's to come.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's both backward looking and forward looking. I think with a layoff, there's a lot of questions you're not going to get answered. You probably won't really understand why you got laid off. You really won't get a lot of closure on that. It's up to you to find that closure on your own and accept that these are questions that just aren't going to come, right? But again, in that layoff, as you're applying to new jobs and you're applying again on your 100th resume and you think you may get an interview, but you don't, or you get an interview, you think you do well, you don't hear back. They tell you you're the perfect candidate, you don't hear back. You keep submitting all these resumes. That negative capability is part of that belief that something good is going to come of this. It's not having those answers to, well, I was perfectly qualified for this job. Why didn't they like my resume? Or what did I say during that interview that turned them off? Or what did I do? It's all of that self-doubt and critical way that we can overanalyze the situation. The negative capability allows you to have peace in not knowing. It's a powerful concept, but one that in the face of uncertainty and what can be equally challenging as the layoff in terms of getting your next job. It's a strong skill to develop.
Yeah, of course. Now, on to my most important question,
Mhm,
possibly the last one.
mhm.
To kind of summarize everything we've talked about, as a father and an author, what lessons do you hope that your children, the readers of your book, as well as whoever listens to this podcast, people going through layoffs, what do you hope they take away from your experiences with job loss and the journey of self discovery that follows after a layoff?
Yeah, I think there's something in that is conducive to having a growth mindset. Like getting back to that idea of the river and the rock, the rigidity of the rock, but the flexibility of the stream. In that is a fixed mindset versus a growth or learning mindset. To get through this experience, you need to be open to the growth and one of the things I would love for my kids to take from this is that growth mindset. And an example of that simply would be if somebody is struggling with math, they would tell themselves, I don't understand this yet, but with practice, I'll get better. That's the Sarah Blakely story in a nutshell. That's the negative capability in a nutshell. That's a lot of these different things in the belief in oneself, the belief in tomorrow, and the belief in that the journey isn't done yet. You may not understand math yet, but with practice tomorrow I can. I think that if there was a way to give somebody hope that this is a temporary setback, it's rooted in that.
Yeah, incredible. Well, Steve, this has been an incredibly insightful and important conversation. Thank you so much for being open and vulnerable about your journey, and especially at a time, like I said, where a lot of people were going to be needing this book, needing what you have to say, and the advice that you have for them. So, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And for our listeners who want to learn more, where can they find your book, The Layoff Journey, and how can they also connect with you?
Yeah. So please go to Amazon.com. You can just search The Layoff Journey. You can find me on Substack, Steve Jaffe. You can go to my website, which is thestevejaffe.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm also on Instagram as Steve Jaffe, The Layoff Journey. So any of those ways we can connect. I would love to, if somebody has a layoff story that they want to tell or share, I'd love to listen and I'd love to connect.
Perfect. I will make sure that all of those links are in our show notes and are in the description. So hopefully people can find them easily. Steve, thank you so much again for your time. And I will definitely be, following your journey. And I hope to stay connected with you and speak soon again.
Thank you so much.